If you ask most people where Iranian come from, they'll say Persia. Maybe they'll mention the Aryans, maybe the ancient empire, the grand palaces at Persepolis, the kings who ruled half the known world. But the DNA tells a story that goes much further back, and much stranger than any of those answers. The word Aryan sits at the center of Iranian national identity. The very name Iran derives from it. For generations, the story went something like this. Steppe warriors from the north swept into the plateau around 3,000 years ago, brought their Indo-European language, became the Persian, built an empire, and that was the beginning. That was where Iranians came from. But here is the problem. That story is only the most recent layer, and ancient DNA, extracted from thousands of year-old remains buried in mountain caves and plateau settlements, is now revealing the layers beneath it. What the science shows is not a simple origin story. It is something older, more continuous, and far more surprising. Start with the modern map. Iran sits at the center of an enormous geographic crossroads. To the northwest, Turkey and the Caucasus. To the west, Iraq. To the northeast, Turkmenistan and Afghanistan. To the east, Pakistan. To the south, the Persian Gulf. And running through the country itself, two of the most significant mountain ranges in Western Asia, the Zagros in the west and the Alborz in the north. Between them spreads a high plateau, ringed by those mountains, bisected by the vast salt desert of the Dashti Kavir. This geography matters deeply. The Zagros Mountains were not just a landscape, they were a corridor, a refuge, and a barrier all at once. The Alborz sealed off the narrow Caspian coastline from the plateau. The desert made internal movement difficult and created natural population pockets. For tens of thousands of years, geography determined who stayed, who mixed, and who stayed separate. The plateau was ancient before anyone called it Persia. And the people living there today reflect that complexity. Modern Iran is not one ethnicity. The country includes Persians, Kurds, Azeris, Lurs, Gilaks, Mazandaranis, Balak, Turkmen, Arabs, and Persian Gulf Islanders, among others. Some speak Indo-Iranian languages, some speak Turkic, some speak Semitic Arabic. The ethnic mosaic is enormous, but that raises a genuine question. What do these groups actually share beneath the surface of language and culture? That is precisely where the DNA becomes remarkable. The identity problem begins with the word Iranian itself. Is it a nationality, a language family, a genetic population, an ethnic label? The answer depends entirely on which century you are standing in. Modern Iran as a political entity is less than a century old in its current form. The Persian language has been spoken on the plateau for roughly 3,000 years, but the people who speak it, and the people who lived there before them, carry ancestry that is far older than any label ever applied to them. This is the twist that ancient DNA introduced. The genetic foundation of populations on the Iranian plateau was largely in place thousands of years before the first Indo-Iranian language arrived. The steppe migrants who brought those languages were real. Their arrival changed the cultural and linguistic landscape. But they moved into a region that was already deeply populated, already genetically distinct, and already ancient. The Aryan migration did not create Iranians. It arrived into something already there. So, if the steppe herders did not create the Iranian gene pool, what did? The answer begins not on the grasslands of the Eurasian steppe, but in the mountain valleys of the Zagros, roughly 10,000 years ago. In 2016, researchers sequenced the genome of an early Neolithic woman recovered from a site called Ganj Dareh, high in the Zagros Mountains of western Iran. The results were striking. Her ancestry was genetically distinct not only from ancient European populations, but also from the Neolithic farmers of Anatolia, the people who would later bring agriculture westward into Europe. She belonged to something older and different. She and her community were among the earliest herders in the world, tending domesticated goats in mountain valleys, while much of Europe was still entirely hunter-gatherer. And her people were not genetically interchangeable with the other Neolithic farmers of the region. They were their own deep lineage. Scientists studying ancient West Eurasian populations have identified something they call basal Eurasian ancestry, a deeply divergent lineage that appears to have separated from other Eurasian populations very early, before many of the major ancestral branches of Eurasia split apart. Ancient hunter-gatherers from sites in the Alborz and Zagros regions carry this signal at exceptionally high levels. One unusual aspect that researchers have noted is that this ancient lineage appears to have carried little or no Neanderthal ancestry, unlike most ancient populations outside of Africa. This does not make them less ancient. It makes them a distinct chapter in deep human prehistory, a lineage that stayed in Western Asia while the rest of the world moved outward and mixed. These were not transitional people. They were a stable, successful population, living in the mountain valleys of what is now Iran for thousands of years. And a significant portion of their genetic signature is still present in Iranians today. From that ancient foundation, the Neolithic period brought its own continuity. The early farmers of the Iranian Plateau, like the people of Ganj Dareh, appeared to descend from those same Zagros hunter-gatherers without a sharp genetic break. This is not the pattern seen in Europe, where farming arrived largely through a migration of Anatolian farmers who significantly replaced the older hunter-gatherers. On the Iranian plateau, the transition from forager to farmer seems to have been more continuous. The people were already there. They adopted new practices without needing to be replaced by someone else. This distinction has a large consequence. The Anatolian Neolithic farmers, who seeded much of European ancestry, were a separate population that had diverged from the Iranian Plateau people thousands of years earlier. The two groups were related at a deep level, both part of the broader ancient West Eurasian world, but they had been separated long enough to become genetically distinct. The Iranian line moved towards Central Asia and South Asia. The Anatolian line moved into Europe. Two different branches of an ancient world, already diverged before the pyramids, before writing, before bronze. Then the Bronze Age arrived, and the Iranian plateau began to accumulate new layers. Research from sites spanning the Chalcolithic and early Bronze Age suggests that new genetic components entered the picture, some from the direction of the Levant, some from Central and South Asia to the east, and eventually some from the north. This was not a sudden replacement. It looks more like a slow regional mixing as the plateau, with its geographic position at the center of Western and Central Asian trade and movement, absorbed influences from multiple directions. But the older Zagros Plateau baseline, that ancient foundation, persisted. This is where the Steppe story enters. And this is where the familiar national myth gets complicated. Around the late Bronze Age and early Iron Age, populations connected to the Sintashta and Andronovo archaeological cultures on the Eurasian steppe, the people now understood to be the linguistic ancestors of the Indo-Iranian language family, began moving south and east. These migrations carried the ancestor of Persian, Kurdish, Balochi, and dozens of other Iranian languages down from the grasslands and into the plateau. The genetic signature of those steppe populations, called steppe ancestry by researchers, is detectable in modern Iranians. It is real. The migration happened. But here is the part that should stop you. The language traveled. The DNA followed, but not to the same degree. The Iranian plateau was already a populated, established, genetically deep world. The steppe arrivals added a layer. They did not erase what was already there. How does a language travel without most of the people who invented it? This is one of the central puzzles of ancient human history, and the Iranian case offers one of its clearest examples. Languages can spread through prestige, through political domination, through trade networks, through the adoption of a ruling class's speech, without replacing the underlying population. Researchers studying modern Iranian genetic diversity have identified multiple documented instances of language adoption in Iran's history that left little or no matching genetic trace. The language changed, the genome mostly did not. A 2025 study analyzing ancient samples from 9 archaeological sites across Iran, spanning from roughly 4,700 BCE all the way to 1300 CE, covering the Copper Age, Bronze Age, Iron Age, and the Achaemenid, Parthian, and Sassanid imperial periods, found something remarkable: a high degree of genetic continuity across that entire span. The ancient Iranian gene pool appears to have remained largely stable across more than 5,000 years of history. Empires rose and fell, languages shifted, religions changed, but the underlying genetics of plateau populations showed endurance rather than replacement. The regional picture inside Iran adds still more texture. A landmark 2019 study published in PLOS Genetics analyzed genome-wide data from over 1,000 individuals representing 11 distinct Iranian ethnic groups. What they found challenges the expectation that a country with such linguistic and ethnic diversity would show sharp genetic divisions. Most of the groups, Persians, Kurds, Lurs, Azeris, Gilaks, Mazandaranis, and even Iranian Arabs, clustered closely together in a pattern researchers called the Central Iranian Cluster. Despite speaking languages from 3 entirely different language families, these groups share a deep common genetic foundation that appears to reflect long-term continuity from ancient times. The shared ancestry is older than their current linguistic identities. The Caspian groups, Gilaks and Mazandaranis, living between the Alborz Range and the Caspian Sea, carry their own northern Iranian signals, shaped by the geographic isolation that the mountains created along that narrow coastal strip. The Balak and Sistanis, closer to the borders of Pakistan and Afghanistan, show additional South and Central Asian ancestry, consistent with their position at the eastern edge of the plateau. The Persian Gulf Islanders carry traces of sub-Saharan African and Arabian gene flow, reflecting centuries of maritime contact and the human movement that came with it. The Turkmen in the northeast carry Central Asian steppe ancestry connected to later Turkic migrations rather than the older Iranian foundation. But the result that researchers found most striking involves the Azeris. Iranian Azeris speak a Turkic language, not an Indo-Iranian one. Based on language alone, you might expect them to cluster genetically with Turkic populations from Central Asia. They do not. In the genomic data, Iranian Azeris cluster with Persian-speaking Iranians, not with Turkic populations from further east. The language is Turkic. The ancestry is overwhelmingly the ancient Iranian plateau lineage. This is one of the most direct demonstrations in the entire data set of language changing without population replacement. The Turkic language arrived, perhaps through political expansion, cultural prestige, or community adoption over centuries, but it landed on a population whose genetic roots were already deep in the same ancient foundation as their Persian-speaking neighbors. This is the conclusion that no one expects going in. A country with dozens of ethnic groups, multiple language families, and thousands of years of documented invasion, conquest, and imperial transition. And the DNA shows a level of genetic continuity that is unusual even by world standards. Some research suggests that today's German population retains perhaps 10 to 20% of the genetic ancestry of the hunter-gatherers who populated Central Europe 10,000 years ago. Iran, by contrast, appears to have retained far more of its ancient Neolithic and pre-Neolithic substrate, making it one of the most genetically continuous populations in all of Western and Central Asia. The Achaemenid Empire stretched from Greece to India. The Parthians held the plateau for 5 centuries. The Sassanids built one of the most powerful states of the ancient world. Arab conquest brought Islam. Turkic dynasties ruled for centuries. Mongol armies crossed the plateau. Each of these chapters reshaped culture, religion, language, and political structure. Ancient DNA from the imperial period suggests that through all of it, the core genetic population of the plateau endured. The culture was reshaped many times. The ancestry was not. What does that mean for who Iranians are today? It means that the DNA reveals something more interesting than the national myth admitted. The familiar story, Aryans arrived, became Persians, built an empire, is not wrong so much as it is the most recent caption on a much older image. Beneath Persian, beneath Aryan, beneath the Bronze Age migrations, there are Neolithic farmers tending the world's earliest goats in Zagros Valley settlements. Beneath them, Ancient hunter-gatherers carried a lineage so old and distinct that modern researchers gave it a special name, simply to describe how different it was from everything around it. A lineage that appears to have sheltered in the mountains of Western Asia, while the rest of the human world moved and mixed outward in every other direction. The oldest layer of Iranian DNA was already ancient when the pyramids were being built. The people who carried it never called themselves Iranians or Persians or anything we would recognize today. They did not need to. They simply lived in the mountains, herded their animals, buried their dead, and passed their genes to children who passed them on again across 10,000 years of continuous human presence. This shows deep continuity. Modern Iranians are the descendants of basal Eurasian hunter-gatherers, Zagros Neolithic herders, Bronze Age plateau farmers, Iron Age steppe arrivals, imperial populations, Caspian isolates, Gulf coastal traders, Central Asian frontier communities, and the long, unbroken, layered thread connecting all of them. The ethnic labels are real, the national borders are real, the language families are real, but none of them perfectly maps onto the genetic story. They are labels placed on top of something far older and far more layered than any single name can hold. Ancestry, in the end, is not about purity. It is not a ranking, a destiny, or a claim. It is a record of movement, survival, mixture, adaptation, and time. And the Iranian Plateau, it turns out, holds one of the deepest and most continuous chapters of that record anywhere in the world.